Imagine living in a place where everything is controlled and escape seems impossible. Even so, some people challenge the system with courage, creativity, and luck. To get out, many North Koreans crossed dangerous borders and faced improbable situations, with several breathtaking stories, and that is exactly what you're going to see here today. A 53-year-old woman, identified as Choi Chin-young, decided to take legal action in South Korea by directly accusing Kim Jong-un of crimes committed within the country's detention system. According to human rights organizations, this is the first time that a defector born in North Korea has filed a formal lawsuit against the regime itself. Choi is seeking compensation of around $37,000 from the North Korean state. In addition, she filed a criminal complaint so that prosecutors can investigate possible crimes against humanity attributed to Kim Jong-un and 5 other high-ranking officials from Pyongyang. Her story is marked by forced comings and goings. Choi managed to escape North Korea in 1997, but ended up being forcibly returned by China 4 times between the years 2000 and 2008. In the last repatriation, the situation became even harsher. She claims she was detained for 5 months in 3 different facilities in the province of North Hamgyong. During this period, Choi reports that she suffered greatly from crimes of an intimate nature. All of this allegedly happened inside the regime's detention centers. So far, the North Korean government has not officially responded to the lawsuit. Technically, South Korean courts can analyze this type of case because the country's constitution does not recognize the North as a separate state, but as part of the same territory. The North Korea Database Center for Human Rights has also said that it intends to take this case to the United Nations and the International Criminal Court, a move that could set an important precedent, even though the outcome remains uncertain. A bizarre and hard-to-believe case was the attack on Korean Air Flight 858 at the end of the 1980s. The person responsible for carrying out the plan was Kim Hae-yeon-hui, an agent trained by the North Korean regime from a very young age. She was born in Pyongyang in 1962, and while still a teenager, caught the attention of the government. At 18 years old, she was recruited into a secret program and spent about 7 years being prepared to operate outside the country. She learned languages, combat techniques, and received a completely controlled view of the world, especially regarding South Korea. In 1987, Kim received a direct mission. She and a veteran agent traveled through several countries using false identities as Japanese tourists. The target was Flight 858, which departed from Baghdad bound for Seoul with a stopover in Abu Dhabi. Inside the aircraft, a device disguised as a portable radio was left behind. Hours later, the plane disappeared over the sea and 115 people on board died. After leaving the aircraft at the stopover, the 2 agents tried to continue their journey but raised suspicions in Bahrain. Kim's partner did not survive the approach by authorities. She was detained and weeks later taken to South Korea, where she eventually confessed to everything. Kim was tried and sentenced to death, but ended up receiving a presidential pardon. The South Korean government decided to use the case as public proof of the practices of the northern regime. Today, she lives under constant protection and wrote a book telling her story, donating the profits to the victims' families. A story that seems like a movie, mixing propaganda, manipulation, and consequences that span decades. In one of the most heavily guarded areas on the planet, an unusual scene broke the routine of the demilitarized zone between the Koreas. A military jeep appeared at high speed, carrying a North Korean officer determined to flee the regime he had served for years. In seconds, his colleagues realized the attempt and reacted. The soldier, later identified as Oh Chong-song, accelerated toward the joint security area, the point where North and South face each other just meters apart. He knew exactly what he was getting into. The region is surrounded by constant surveillance, armed posts, and risks that make any escape almost impossible. When the Jeep could not advance any further, Oh Chong-song jumped out of the vehicle and continued on foot. From the northern side, soldiers began to act to prevent the crossing. Even wounded, he kept crawling until he crossed the line that separates the two sides. On the South Korean side, soldiers ran to him and pulled him into a safe area under great tension. The officer was rushed to a hospital where he underwent delicate surgeries. During treatment, doctors found severe signs of malnutrition and parasites, something that shocked the world for involving someone from within the armed forces. Oh Chong-song's escape became a symbol of how far some people are willing to go when they see freedom as the only way out, even if it costs everything. An unusual case involving North Korean defectors drew the attention of South Korean authorities. This time it was not an individual escape, but an entire group. 13 North Korean citizens who worked at a restaurant abroad decided to cross together to the south. According to the South Korean government, the group consisted of 1 male manager and 12 female employees. All entered the country on the same date and were in good health. For diplomatic and security reasons, Seoul did not reveal where the restaurant was located, nor the route used in the escape, precisely to prevent them from being identified or tracked by the regime. The Ministry of Unification stated that the decision was made for humanitarian reasons and highlighted that this is the first known case of employees from the same North Korean restaurant abroad defecting as a group. An important detail is what allegedly influenced this choice. According to authorities, exposure to South Korean soap operas, movies, television, and internet showed a reality very different from that presented by official Northern propaganda. Another factor cited was financial pressure. With harsher international sanctions in effect, workers sent abroad began to face intense demands to send money to Pyongyang. It is estimated that the North Korean leader raises around $10 million per year, with more than 100 restaurants spread across 12 countries. For many, the collective escape was seen as the only possible way out given this scenario. Few people outside Korea know the name Hwang Jung-yap, but he was one of the most important figures ever formed within the North Korean regime. For decades, Hwang was not just a government official. He helped create the ideological foundation that sustained the country for generations. Born in 1923, Hwang studied in Korea, spent time in the Soviet Union, and built a solid career within the Workers' Party. In the 1960s, he became a professor and later president of Kim Il-sung University. It was there that he approached the top of power and ended up becoming the main formulator of the Yuche idea, the philosophy that defended total self-reliance for North Korea. In 1972, he reached one of the highest positions in the country, presiding over the Standing Committee of the Supreme People's Assembly for more than a decade. In practice, he was at the core of the regime, but over time, his relationship with Kim Jong-il began to sour, especially when Hwang started questioning political and economic decisions. In 1997 came the breaking point. During an official trip, Hwang entered the South Korean embassy in Beijing and requested protection. It was the highest-ranking defection ever recorded up to that point, causing enormous impact inside and outside the country. After arriving in the South, Hwang became a fierce critic of the regime he helped build. He wrote books, gave interviews, and began exposing the internal workings of the North Korean government. He lived under constant surveillance until his death in 2010, officially due to a heart problem. His trajectory shows how someone who helped sustain a system ended up becoming one of its most uncomfortable voices. Few people imagine what it is like to grow up in a place where certain words simply do not exist. Chang Yong-jin lived more than 30 years in North Korea without ever hearing the term homosexuality. For him, what he felt had no name, only confusion, guilt, and silence. Still young, he had an arranged marriage set up by his parents. From the first day, he realized that something did not fit. He did not understand what love was and felt responsible for his wife's unhappiness. He sought out doctors trying to find out what was wrong with him. In one of the consultations, he was reprimanded so aggressively that he had to run out of the clinic. Even without being able to explain it, Jin realized he was not alone. In the army, he met a superior with similar feelings. In his hometown, there were men who never married and lived in isolation. They were seen as strange by society. Gradually, Jin understood that he was in love with a childhood friend. They shared simple moments, such as walking together and sleeping in the same space, something common in a country where almost no one talked about it. On a defining night, Jin felt that he could not continue living that way. After a failed attempt to leave through China, he made an extreme decision and crossed the demilitarized zone, a very rare path among defectors. Already in South Korea, in 1998, he read about homosexuality for the first time in a magazine. At that time, he was already 37 years old. There, everything finally made sense. Even feeling isolated, both as a defector and as a gay man, Jin decided to write his story by hand. For him, freedom arrived late, but it arrived, and that changed everything. In 2019, a young woman named Songmi Park made a decision that would change her life. At 17 years old, she was preparing to cross the Yalu River on the border between North Korea and China. The water was freezing, the current strong, and the risk enormous. Even so, what spoke louder was not fear, but the desire to reunite with her mother, who had been absent from her life since childhood. This was not the first time Songmi had crossed that river. When she was little, she had been taken by her mother during a failed escape attempt. After that, the family was separated, and she grew up in the north of the country, living with her grandparents in a rural region near the border. She did not attend school and spent her childhood trying to help however she could, searching for plants in the mountains to eat or sell. Years later, her mother managed to reach South Korea and spend a decade saving money to pay for her daughter's escape. Escaping is neither simple nor cheap. It involves intermediaries, long routes, and absolute silence. When Songmi's turn finally came, she crossed the river alone, moved hidden through China, passed through Laos and Thailand until reaching a South Korean embassy. It took months until the reunion. When they finally saw each other, mother and daughter barely recognized one another. They cried, embraced, and started over from scratch. Today, Songmi lives in South Korea, studies, and visits schools to tell her story. For her, crossing the river was not just an escape, but the beginning of a new life and the chance to rebuild bonds that seemed lost forever. After 4 years without similar records, a new case drew attention in the EC. In the early hours of a Tuesday morning, 4 North Koreans crossed the northern limit line in a small wooden boat and, when intercepted, stated that they wanted to leave the country. The movement was detected before dawn by South Korean coastal surveillance systems. According to military authorities, the boat was identified around 4 o'clock in the morning after an unusual movement coming from the north. Shortly after, patrol ships and aircraft were sent to the area. An army radar also detected the object advancing at low speed, which raised even more attention. With the help of thermal sensors, the route was tracked until the final interception. A South Korean fishing boat even spotted the vessel about 11 kilometers from the coast and alerted the Coast Guard. Even so, criticism emerged regarding how the initial crossing went unnoticed. Officials explained that the maritime line in the region extends for more than 400 kilometers, which makes immediate identification of small and slow boats difficult. They stated that after detection, there was full cooperation among the Navy, Coast Guard, and Army. After all this, the 4 individuals go through a verification process conducted by the military, intelligence agents, and the Ministry of Unification. In 2014, Mrs. Park and her son Andy decided to leave North Korea after years separated from their older daughters, who had already managed to reach the South. The decision came with no guarantee of success. It was either move forward or remain trapped in a system that allowed no choice. The escape began with crossing the river that separates the country from China. From there, mother and son spent days walking through mountainous areas, facing temperatures close to minus 30 degrees, little food, and constant exhaustion. At some moments, Mrs. Park thought she could not continue, but Andy refused to leave her behind.
Eu tenho sorte de estar viva. Foi assim que eu lidei com essa notícia. Eu tenho que aceitar como as coisas aconteceram. O dano já tá feito.
After 3 days, they encountered Chinese farmers who agreed to help, even risking trouble with local authorities. From there, the journey continued in a fragmented way, with long walks, hidden stretches in vehicles, and constant detours to avoid inspection. In total, nearly 3,000 kilometers were covered inside China. Throughout the entire route, they carried a last resort in case they were captured, since China usually returns North Koreans to the regime, where the consequences are severe. Upon arriving in Laos, Mrs. Park had to undergo serious treatment on her feet due to damage caused by extreme cold. Even so, she described it as a victory for being alive. Today, the family is reunited in Seoul. Andy became an artist and uses his work to portray the division of the Koreas. The Park family's story shows how far someone can go when the only choice is to move forward without being able to give up. This case seems like something out of a movie, but it really happened. Cho Chang-ho was born in Pyongyang in 1930 and, while still young, moved with his family to Seoul. In 1950, when the Korean War began, he joined the South Korean army and became an officer shortly afterward, but in 1951, during a battle in the Inje region, everything changed. Cho was captured by Chinese forces and ended up taken to North Korea. What no one imagined is that this capture would turn into a captivity lasting 43 years. Even after the armistice of 1953, Cho was not released. He spent decades under constant surveillance, lived in labor camps, and was later sent to coal mines in the north of the country. During this period, he married and had 3 children, but family life was marked by extreme control and daily pressure. In 1994, already over 60 years old, Cho made an unlikely decision. He managed to escape by crossing the Yalu River and reached China, where he received help from ethnic Koreans to return to the south. Before fleeing, he tried to convince his children to go with him, but they decided to stay. Back in South Korea, Cho dedicated the rest of his life to a very specific cause. He began speaking publicly about prisoners of war who still remained in the North. In 2006, he even testified before the United States Congress on the topic. Cho died that same year in Seoul. His story became known as that of the officer who returned after being considered lost for more than 4 decades, a reminder that some conflicts continue long after the official end of wars. In 1953, a young North Korean pilot named No Kum-sok, who would later become known as Kenneth Rowe, made a decision no one expected. He simply flew to the south, piloting a MiG-15 fighter jet, one of the most feared aircraft of that period. At that time, the skies over the Korean peninsula were the stage for intense aerial disputes. The MiG-15 was used by forces aligned with the Soviet bloc and faced American fighters almost every day. Dissatisfied with living conditions and the regime's control in his country, No Kum-sok began planning his escape in silence. He studied maps, memorized routes, and prepared himself technically so as not to raise suspicion. On September 21st, 1953, during a routine flight, he changed the aircraft's course and headed straight south. The journey was tense. There was a risk of interception, mechanical failure, and radar confusion. When the jet approached Gimpo Air Base, South Korean and American authorities thought for a few minutes that it was an attack. The landing revealed the surprise. The pilot stepped out alone and made it clear that he wanted to remain in the south. The aircraft, almost intact, became a valuable piece for technical analysis by the United States. After that, No Kum-sok went to the United States, studied engineering, and pursued a career in aviation as a test pilot. His family, who remained in the north, faced severe consequences because their families are also considered guilty when someone commits a crime. This escape went down in history as one of the most symbolic in military aviation and shows how a single decision can cross borders and change destinies. Do not forget to subscribe to watch more videos like this.